Welcome to the Faith in Sports Forum hosted by the Faith in Sports Institute at Baylor's Truett Seminary. We are so excited tonight to have Jess Caldwell and Keith Wahl with us from Valor Christian High School. We're going to learn about their program called Sport as Worship and get some ideas and principles for how to do faith and sports integration at a Christian school. Really encouraging stuff that Keith and Jess have developed. And so I think you'll enjoy this. Quick notes on how this will go. We have a presentation set up here. So Keith and Jess will walk through their program. And while that's going on, you can certainly ask questions, use the chat box, go to the Q&A, all of that stuff. For the second half of our time together, we'll have a facilitated live Q&A. So you can ask them questions, you can get their input, get their wisdom, get their perspective on what they do. So first half presentation / workshop, second half Q&A, that time is yours. Let me do brief intros too before we get going. Keith Wahl serves as Director of Athletics for Valor Christian High School. And Jessika Caldwell is the Assistant Athletic Director, focuses on spiritual formation, also the head coach for the women's basketball team, and just found out before we hit record here, has won 4 state championships at 3 different classification levels. So it's like the boxer who's unifying the belts, just moving up to bigger classification and unifying the women's basketball title belt. So glad to have Keith and Jessika with us. You'll hear more about their story, some of their connections to FSI, and to hear some of their wisdom. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Paul. I'm really honored and really excited about this. So Jess gets to she gets to give the first slide. So I'm going to get started here with sharing my screen. And Coach Jess, take it away.
All right. Little picture of me to begin. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. I actually grew up as a Christian athlete. I came to know the Lord when I was 12 years old and really haven't looked back from there. I'm actually a Baylor Bear, so it's such an honor to me to continue to be connected with Baylor University and just the things that are going on at that institution, both athletically and academically and beyond. And my senior year, we had an opportunity to play all the way into the Sweet 16. And you may be wondering, did I win a national championship? No, I didn't. They won the year after I graduated. So there is still a little bittersweet jealousy in my heart from that experience. However, I'm really grateful to have played for Kim Mulkey and laid that foundation, and just have had some incredible mentors at Baylor University. As we kind of get into this, the big question for me always, especially as a Christian athlete playing for Christian coaches, was, the encouragement and the spur on would be, go out there and give God the glory. And man, I wanted to do that. And yet I didn't know how. Nobody ever told me what it looked like or what it sounded like or whether I did or I didn't. And there was just this innate craving for, man, something a little bit deeper.
That's great, Jess. My story is a little different in that I didn't come to Christ until 2001 when I was 27 years old. So I'm one of those late spiritual bloomers in the world. And when Valor opened in 2007, I had been working as a head coach in a public school up the road. And I had a chance to start my journey in private schools and private Christian schools in 2007. And you'll see I'm pointing my finger there to my first book. Wrote that in 2017 as I attempted to begin my articulation of what it meant to integrate faith into coaching. I had the great blessing and opportunity to start working with Jess in 2019 when we started doing some projects together around spiritual integration and started to scratch on this idea. And there was a day when I was in her office and just overlooked her shoulder at her practice plan. And there was this little block in the middle. And I didn't know what in the world it was. And I had to go, hey, Jess, what is a lab? And that thing has changed the game for us in a lot of really powerful ways.
Starting in about 2017, I'd been at Valor for a couple years and started to kind of oversee our chaplaincy program. We had faculty and staff and members from our community serve as chaplains for all of our sports teams here on campus. And I started to kind of dabble in helping provide resources and connection and just encouragement. But the biggest thing was there was a lack of consistency across the board, from sport to sport, from chaplain to chaplain. And some people were doing incredible things, but I also learned that it was a lot of work, and especially for our coaches and again for our chaplains. When Keith and I connected in 2019, we started to do a lot more intentional work around, okay, what does this look like to create a cohesive program that had a common language, as well as a jumping off points for our coaches and chaplains. So they felt confident to be able to step into their environments and deliver, whether it was devotionals or labs, which we'll talk about more, and just go more in depth than kind of what we were doing at that point. And that's when we found the Faith in Sport Institute. It drew me back to my Baylor roots, and I'm so grateful. The connections we have with John White and Paul Putz and the people there have been extremely impactful and encouraging to us. And ultimately, as a result of COVID, Keith and I were able to take a ton of classes online through the FSI program, as well as we sat in on a graduate class offered by John White. Best part about it was we got to do have all the information and none of the homework. Best class I've ever taken in my
Amen.
life. And we had an opportunity at the end of the class, as we look at this picture of this idea of what do you wish for? And when we pick up that little thing and blow on it, what do you wish for? And we had a chance to ask those students, what do you wish that you had when you were in high school as a Christian athlete? What did you want to know? Or what would you have experienced? And really from there, we wanted something deeper, something more tangible, and just moving beyond kind of the Christian cliches that were present at that time for us here at Valor.
And so this is our opportunity to bless Baylor back, because of all the things that they have done for us. This is what is possible when you engage with the Faith in Sport Institute. And that's ultimately what we hope this program and this forum is an opportunity to say, hey, this is possible in your place as well. The tools, the resources, the theological background, these are the things that we really learned and sharpened our sword on. And we're just so very thankful for that. And what have we created? We've created a number of things in our school that have really bore a lot of fruit. And the first is, and that's a picture of our very first class. What a good group that was. Our first class, it's called Faith and Sport Integration, and we've come to call it Sport as an Act of Worship, Sport as Worship. And we try to teach very intentional practices around that in the idea of spiritual formation. Up on we'll go bottom left first, would be one of the choice chapels that we've done here at Valor Christian, where we've had this opportunity these last couple of springs where the student body has a chance to choose the chapel, and there's a bunch of different offerings, and we've had over 300 of our kids choose our chapel, and we've had to do it in the gym and had the opportunity to really share principles from Sport as Worship. In addition, we have Jess's position, so go to that top right, where she has the opportunity to oversee spiritual formation here at our school as an assistant athletic director, and her impact has just been absolutely tremendous. And then down at the bottom right, that's one of the labs that I did in the softball program here at Valor Christian. And all of these things that ultimately there's all these resources to share with all of our coaches and continue to find new inspirations in spiritual formation that hopefully bear great fruit. What I want to share next is the things we're going to share are not the way, but maybe a way that we have found success in spiritual formation of coaches and athletes. And there's some uniqueness to Valor Christian and the spot that we are in. First of all, the age of the athletes. We feel like what we do works at the high school setting, maybe even early college. Coach Jess and I both continue to mentor and speak to our former athletes at the college level. we don't necessarily know about middle school. We don't necessarily know about deep into college. We feel like that's part of our niche, is that age group anywhere from 15 to 21. It seems to fit and resonate. Secondly, the region, I think, is really important, that we're in Colorado. We are not in the Bible Belt, and there's some other cultural differences that just come with that due to geography. We're a non-denominational school, and we're a non-covenant school. And so we are very missional in our outreach and the things that we're doing. So the ideas that we are presenting might be unique, and they might not work as well as they might in Waco, Texas. We don't necessarily know that. We know that the things that we're going to present to you have landed well in these areas. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that as facilitators of the class and this program of Sport as Worship, we don't have seminary degrees. We sat in a Bible department meeting today as the least qualified people in the room, I would say. But our school does have an entrepreneurial spirit, and they're willing to let us try stuff. And that's a very, very great blessing that we do not take lightly. And I think we've all heard this idea of mental toughness, this idea of being comfortable, being uncomfortable. And shout out to one of my favorite content creators, Trevor Reagan, who runs the Learner Lab. I love a lot of his stuff. And ultimately, guys, we feel like we're just getting good at going through Feeling Weird Swamp to get to Kinda Good Island. We've just become good learners in the process. And that's ultimately what we hope we share with you today is, yeah, guess what? What we're going to present, it's not comfortable going into this. And I know I surprised Jess. We can go back to being right in front of the stadium a number of years ago, said, hey, what if we taught this as a class? And I think she stared at me like, are you serious? And she learned very quickly that I am an initiator, and we're going to go. We're going to give this a shot. So she's gotten used to being uncomfortable when she presents ideas to me. So Coach Jess, to you with some more details.
Yes, I am getting more comfortable with Feeling Weird Swamp as we move into hopefully Kinda Good Island. And I have the chance to kind of introduce a little bit more about what this looks like. What is Sport as Worship? And I'll kind of start with what it's not. It's not bookends. That's the hope anyway. And when we talk about and when we think about bookends would be like the faith experience outside of the initial sport experience. So we're talking about devotions and prayer, kind of the before and after practice type of things that are super valuable. They have really, really strong importance. And we know not only help with cohesive team unity, opportunities to dive deeper and ask questions, small groups, intentionality and prayer, but we know that there might be something even more that we're missing in the sport experience itself. The bookends really do provide the overflow. They change the heart posture. We know we have to have a prayerful and heart that's eager and willing to accept what the Lord is teaching us, even while we're competing. So those bookends are really, really important. But really, without books, the bookends don't do anything. They just kind of collect dust. And so what we want to do, we want to create these books, these experiences that tell stories, the spiritual story of our sports seasons in their time at Valor. When we think about the book as a whole, we want to kind of think about what was the cover? What does it look like? The binding, what is it made out of? What's the framework that's designed to hold a certain number of pages? The depth of the story. Is it hardbound? Is it soft? There's so many elements to a story, and that's really what we're trying to capture, is how are we telling a spiritual story of each of our sports seasons for each individual student athlete and our teams as a whole.
And the inspiration that we talk about in Sport as Worship is the rabbinical teachings of Jesus Christ, the idea of being able to see, touch, and feel an idea. So the effectiveness of the Good Samaritan. So this is a picture in the top left of Coach Jess and her team actually walking the road where the Good Samaritan may have happened. And the effectiveness of that is that the people who have heard the story would have walked that very road. The tangible understanding of the parable of the sower, because all of those folks that Jesus would have been preaching to would have planted seed and experienced those different soil conditions. The likelihood in the bottom left there that Jesus would have had a vine in his hand as he taught John 15. And this idea, the Greek for parable, meaning a story that comes alongside. And this is what we're attempting to apply into sport. Stories, ideas, and principles that occur inside of sport and come along that sport experience in order to give it a deep, deep meaning. And this has allowed us to engage with a large group of people, a lot of different groups of people across the spectrum of faith, that being those that are new to the faith or illuminating the scriptures differently for those who have great experience inside of the faith. So the idea, and of course, I'm going to put Christian up here because he's one of our alums and we love him to death and he's fantastic. But we want to bring the spiritual into the physical, and it helps give us a tangible understanding of the truth of the scripture. So fully integrated means that a person can experience the Lord in prayer before and outside the game, just as Christian is on the left. And we tend to see somebody like Christian there praying as an act of worship, but we often miss that it too, the picture on the right, is experiencing worship through his physical movement, through his actions. And we want to recognize both as the ultimate acts of worship. So our first tip of the cap has to go to Athletes in Action and their concept of a lab. So this is what a lab is. This is what I've learned and what I've now learned to say over and over again. Labs are a physical representation of a spiritual concept in a competitive environment. And so we'll talk more maybe during the Q&A time about how we set that up and how we teach that during the course of our class. So the common language that we've developed for our coaches and athletes so that we're all reading from the same book, opening the book, reading the pages in the same way, is this framework that the ancient Hebrews give us through the creation narrative. And that is the chaos waters, the dry land, the garden, and the tree of life. So oftentimes we see people in chaos in that top left, but we also see in competition, we see this idea of barriers in the dry land. And we talk about these 6 barriers to experiencing sport as an act of worship: fear, failure, judgment, idols, comparison, and anxiety. These are the things that keep us from experiencing sport as an act of worship. Go back a slide. Chaos is obviously going to do that. But in order for you to compete at all, you've got to have solid ground to work from. But these are the thing with the barriers, that this is an area where you really can't grow. You can't grow any good vegetation, and you can't grow when you are operating from any of those 6 barriers. And so what we talk about as we move into the garden are these restoratives. And the ancient art in the East of the kintsugi bowl, where they take gold and a precious metal and bind a broken pot back together. These are the restoratives that we talk about. When somebody's experiencing the barriers, we talk about how can they instead tap into those restoratives and use those in order to overcome the barriers. And we're so touched by these amazing scriptures that we have, in particular as it comes to jars of clay from 2 Corinthians 4:7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. These things are from the Lord. They are not of our own power. And this is where we really dove in with Baylor to help us understand the truth of the scriptures in a way that's not just slapping a Bible verse on top of your competition to make this a much more profound story.
So what does this look like when it potentially comes together? I've had an opportunity to walk through with my team several years in now of talking about those beautiful restoratives and doing some things that we'll touch on later called the daily practices, and doing these day to day and week to week, both inside and outside of practice. And this season, we found ourselves having an opportunity to compete in the state tournament again at the 6A level this year. And it was a really incredible opportunity to walk this team through each of the restoratives, kind of culminating in that idea of glory, as I talked about at the very beginning. So when we sat after practice, we did a little lab in practice, we came back to the whiteboard, and before our Final Four game against Cherokee Trail, I asked them one specific question. I said, what would it look like if somebody were to watch you play? How would they see the glory of the Lord? And this was so encouraging to me because we had one of our little point guard, our leader, Emma Lytle, who's going to be competing at the Air Force Academy this year, started just furiously writing down words. She talked about, and people were yelling them out, and you can see different things on there like spark and effort, which the things that we know, but we can draw on other things that we've talked about in our devotionals and the restoratives of what we think about with effort and identity when we tied that together. When we talked about what does it look like to show glory when we're diving on the floor? It's one of my favorite things. Man, that is such a beautiful picture of that's glory. And we can give that glory back to the Lord, taking chances, playing in freedom. So many of the devotionals that we had an opportunity to go deep into, as well as exercise these very things, were starting to come out, and they were able to attribute, man, this is how I can see God's glory in my teammates. And this is how we want people to see what God's glory looks like in us. So it wasn't necessarily just about winning. And it's amazing when we have that opportunity to win. But there are moments when your back's against the wall. And that moment came in the semifinal game against Cherokee Trail, who was the #1 team in the state at that point. It was a back and forth game, end of the third quarter. And one of our starters, who was our best defender, kind of quasi best post defender, we're pretty tiny, but she's going to guard the big and she's going to give it all she has. She goes down with a knee injury and not coming back into the game. We didn't know how significant it was at the time. And it's one of those moments as a coach, if you've ever been in that environment, that, you can kind of feel your heart sink for just a moment and say, like, what do I do? What do I say? How do I continue to keep this team back on track? And what do we draw into? And what do we draw on? And ultimately, what we drew back to was the things that we were doing every single day within our practice to ensure a heart posture that changed the moment of the game. And I would love to say, man, this is all me. This was absolutely the Lord, because you're going to see a clip here. I am at a loss for words. This is between the third quarter and the fourth quarter. I'm telling them and I'm gushing over how proud I am of them, how much I love them. And normally you'd give some like, okay, let's fix different spots and positions and what are we going to do strategically. But my heart was so turned to something we do every single day called a gratitude minute in our practice, where we spend 60 seconds in gratitude to the Lord for what he is doing in our lives, whether it's individually or collectively, but ultimately it became an overflow. And so what you're going to hear and what you're going to see here is me taking a time out and ultimately the Lord stirring my heart, and it became a gratitude minute.
Okay, guys, cross your fingers. Give me a thumbs up if you hear it, okay?
I am so proud of you. I'm so proud. I'm so proud of your grit. I'm so proud of your determination. I'm so proud that you get it and you keep going. So proud. So we have 8 more minutes to do that. You do not back down for a second. You give all you have. I am so thankful. Stay in that place of gratitude. What are you thankful for right now, B? Emma's short. I love it. What are you thankful for, Emma? What are you thankful for? God showing up for us. What are you thankful for? What are you thankful for? And Texas, let's go! Oh, it just brings such joy to my heart when I get to see those curls and in that moment. And I don't know if you could really hear it, but I know, and I get to remember, and I'm so thankful somebody actually caught that moment for me to be able to hold on to. But Quinn says the Lord shows up for us. And so it was one of my point guards. And ultimately, it wasn't something that caught this team off guard, is because we did it every day, every single day in practice for a minute at a time. And the overflow of that was them being able to stay in that place of thankfulness for that entire fourth quarter.
So let's circle back to this idea of bookends and the book. So the spiritual disciplines that Coach Jess, the gratitude minutes, the times that she took to make sure that those things were in place, those were supporting those experiences experiences and creating more frequent touches. That's what those spiritual disciplines do. When they're praying together, when they're sharing gratitude, when they're doing their gratitude minutes, those are the beautiful things that are supporting those things. Then inside, the things that were on that whiteboard, that's the cover and the binding of the book, the things, the parts of the story that they were telling throughout the course of the year, the labs that they did through the year, the words, the restoratives that they talked about, the things that touch the bookend. Those are all things that happened inside of the game. That's where the book happened. And we can talk more about these barriers and restoratives in the Q&A time, but I think Jess did such a great job of explaining how it all kind of comes together in this total spiritual experience. And what this looks like is attention to what we call the daily rhythms, daily practices, and daily reflections to create the depth of that framework for a much better story. This slide right here, this is the first slide that our students see in class every single day. We ask them to just do a quick reflection. Are they in the chaos? Are they in the dry land? Are they in the garden? Or are they experiencing the tree of life that day? And we ask them to practice presence. Practicing presence is such a big deal across all spiritual disciplines. Where are your feet right now? It's 7:28 in Colorado right now. It's going to be 40 degrees tomorrow. We might wake up to some snow. But man, we're excited about being in this place with Paul Putz and all of you in this moment. But what we do too often is we need to take a look. Is there something ahead of us or behind us that's keeping us from being fully attuned in this moment? What was the thing I just mentioned? Hey, it might snow tomorrow. I'm already thinking about tomorrow. Maybe I'm not fully present in this moment in a way that I should be, but we've got to show up and be present when we are in our practices and in our games. We ask our people to rate themselves in the 5 S's: stillness, sleep, sweat, social, and structure. We actually have brought this into all of our department meetings, and we talk about these very openly to one another. And it's allowed us to really speak into one another's life in a really powerful way. So these daily rhythms have just become a part of the fabric of who we are here at Valor. The next piece is, this is our model for prayer that we talk about, and we call them our IMGCs. And it's just kind of a silly thing. It was a way to help us remember it. When we opened as a school, it was like this big dream. IMGs becoming this big deal, but we always wanted to be something like IMG, but with Christ. And so that's where the IMGC comes in. Invitation, meditation, gratitude, and celebration. I want to go through these with you guys just for a second. So invitation, and actually, Jess, I'll probably ask you to share the backstory to this. Invitation, we want to invite God into all of the spaces, places, and situations in our life. And it's this idea of doing life with God instead of for God. For God can end up being a works-related thing. We just want to invite him into what we're doing. We want him to be playing with us. And Coach, just give a little backstory as to what everyone's looking at in that picture.
Yeah, this was in 2022, I believe, and we actually didn't have a gym for the entire season. We practiced in our small gym. We had a big flood, and so we kind of partnered with a neighborhood school that has become some of our really good friends, Arapahoe High School, and we ended up facing them in the Elite Eight. And they knew, because of how we practiced every day when we were sharing spaces, that we were able to invite God into that space. They started to share in that invitation. And ultimately, when we played together or against each other, our girls, our starters, talked to each other, and they invited one another to participate in a pre-game prayer. So this was pre-game, before we even tipped off. This has not happened before. I think it caught a lot of people off guard. And it was a really beautiful moment of not only inviting one another, but inviting the Lord into that space and into that competition.
So that's the first element of our prayer, is invitation. The second is meditation. We know that in the Christian sphere that we're not trying to empty our minds. We're actually trying to fill it with the word, and we're trying to fill it with scriptures. And that is the idea of Haggah, the chewing of scripture deeply into our soul and allowing his law and all of his wonderful writings in the scriptures. And we want to meditate on that day and night. We want to have that on our mind as we are participating. And just like Coach Jess mentioned, that Quinn, all of a sudden, that God shows up for us. I mean, that is a beautiful meditation and something to consider and think on. And one of the things, this is a good picture of Coach Jess, her team during one of her lifting sessions, what are each of those girls meditating on? They're meditating on the word that they wrote on their hands. And that's just a very simple way to bring integration into what they're doing. Then obviously we want to live in a place of gratitude. You've heard gratitude a bunch throughout the course of the presentation. It's a really important element of the things that we do. And that idea of a gratitude minute was something that changed the scope of one of my seasons as a result. And this was my team in the spring of 2022. We, in case you didn't know, we get some weather up here in Colorado. A lot of times it really messes with a good baseball season. We're getting ready to prepare to play in our regional tournament. We are the underdog. We have to go try to beat two teams that have beaten us by at least 8 runs that year. It's going to be a tough day, and we get some snow and it gets delayed. And so we have to have a Saturday morning practice, and we have to go inside. And newsflash, baseball players who've been outside for a couple months don't want to go back inside. And so they're really kind of irritated. The workout's not going really great. But we had embedded this idea of a gratitude minute throughout the course of our winter. And we did a gratitude minute, and we had them text the coaches and the teammates and anybody in the community that they felt really compelled to share gratitude with. And that gratitude shifted their hearts. And we ended up, I really truly believe that gratitude that we went into that Monday competition with allowed us to upset the 2 teams we shouldn't have beat and move on into the state tournament. I really believe that gratitude was a huge part of that. And lastly, we talk a lot about celebration and making sure that we celebrate every little victory along the way. Because we in the Western world, we really only celebrate the 2 big things, right? We celebrate the C&Es, we celebrate Christmas and Easter. But if you look at the ancient Hebrew and the Jewish calendar, man, did they celebrate the Lord a lot more often than we do. And we want to try to drip that into everything that we do throughout the course of our athletic year. And lastly, and we don't talk about this enough, I'm really excited. Coach Jess is going to do this with her team a bunch this year. She was inspired by Psalm 23 to write a daily reflection. And this is a thing that we now have for all of our athletes that is available for them to reflect and essentially write their own psalm on a daily basis. And that is their reflection on a given day. And I'm really excited for Coach Jess to walk that road with her team this year. So Coach Jess, your last words before I have my last shot here.
Yeah. So what kind of impact have we seen? How are we experiencing and seeing formation and integration and transformation? And I'm smiling because our volleyball team, I think, just won. So they just
Nice.
so in the locker room, celebration. And one of the ways that we do that is creating a community that really is a praying community, changing our heart posture before we even compete, and helping others in our community do the same. This actually is a wall for an entire season of every week's prayers. We give them little handprints like this. So is that physical representation. And we walk them through our IMGCs along with the specific prayer requests. Our sports teams that are consistent in doing this right now have seen such incredible fruit, not only just within their community, but it also has allowed our coaches another level of intention and intentionality in hearing the hearts of their student athletes, what is going on in their hearts, minds, and lives. And it probably is the biggest and best part of my day when I get a chance to hang these up and pray individually over each one of our athletes that fill that out. We have seen kids from our class leading devotionals. These are kind of 2 examples of some of the labs that we've done. One of our students, Channing Fox, a football player, also just spoke at a big worship night that we hosted at the end of our football game called Fifth Quarter. And they're telling these experiences in these stories through those physical representations of spiritual concepts to their friends, to their classmates, and to their teammates. And that has been really impactful, because we know as adults, sometimes our words only go so far. But when it comes from peer to peer, man, do they listen and lean in? Because that's my friend. That's my teammate. That's somebody I'm going to go to bat for. I want to lean into what they're saying. And that has been really special. We've really seen God's word kind of really come alive. And this is actually one of Keith's favorite verses. So I have to say that this is one of his favorites. But Jesus did many other things. If they were all written down, I suppose a whole world could not contain the books that would be written. When we think about that book, we hope that there's so many more stories that are being written, that are faith-filled experiences through sport experiences here, that are just going to tell a continued story of Christ and who he is and how it has impacted and changed our athletes here.
So some of the lessons we've learned along the way, people don't like being uncomfortable and trying new things. And so if some we've got some leaders on here, some athletic directors and coaches and who are trying to lead their coaching staff in this way, yeah, guess what? It's not going to necessarily go smoothly. It's going to be hard. It's hard to get people to go through feeling weird swamp, but what you can do is just be a tremendous encourager of that work. And yeah, just encourage them. It's not about being perfect. It's about going through feeling weird swamp to get to kind of good island. Don't know if you're going to be really great at it, but that might be it. We've seen just tremendous growth, and we have one more video here to show, but the ability is really about trying to see success within the framework. We've seen unbelievable growth in our golf community because of some of the things that Coach Justin Byler does, and those are a couple of his bag tags right there. We've seen great growth in our volleyball program, and that's going to be the video that we're going to share. This is one of our prized possessions, Delaney Russell. What she did is she articulated her pregame prayer, and I'm going to get a chance to share this with you now. We put it to some cool highlights of her as a Gatorade Player of the Year last year. So,
Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to play the sport that I love. I invite you into my game today. I invite you to walk by my side. I invite you to give me comfort and help me to be myself. Give me the strength to be the best teammate and hardest worker I can be. Help me to use my talents you've blessed me with to glorify you. Help me to encourage my teammates and play with joy. Help me to control what I can control, staying positive and working hard. Thank you for blessing me with these girls surrounding me. I pray for their safety and that they will play to glorify you. Thank you for my coaches. I pray that they will coach through an encouraging and meaningful lens. Thank you for the opponent today. I pray that they too will play to glorify you. Thank you for the opportunity to compete in the sport I love. Thank you for blessing me with a body that can handle game after game and back-to-back seasons. Help me to live in this moment with no distractions. Thank you for the energy and passion that you have blessed me with. Thank you for the adrenaline that runs through my veins the second I step on the court. I can't thank you enough for being by my side during this time and blessing me with the ability to play the sport that I love. I'm thankful to have such an incredible way to worship you. Amen.
We want to leave you with this thought. This idea from Billy Graham that he had learned to live all his life on two levels. On one level, he engaged in the activities of the day, but on a deeper level, he was in constant communion with his treasure. And what a gift it is to have the opportunity to help people do this in sport. So, all right, that's our stuff.
Excellent. I mean, to have those videos where we can see and hear how that plays out for your student athletes, for me, that really what it's all about. So that gets to one of our questions here. And just a reminder, if you have those questions in the chat box, you can type those into the Q&A that you see on the bottom of your screen. But a question here from Steve. He mentions the impact stories from those student athletes. He asks, have you seen impact beyond student athletes? Have there been stories of this in families? Is it reaching the broader community where the school is located? What are the ripple effects of this?
Yeah, I want to shine a light on Coach Jess and something that just happened this last Friday night. So we held an event we called Fifth Quarter. After the football game, we did a little worship night after the game, and I'm going to let her tell one of the stories. But we had a worship band from one of the local churches come, and then we did some testimonies, and all of a sudden we had a dozen kids choose baptism and choose to follow Jesus that night. But Coach Jess, tell them about some of the stories of how we're seeing this impact the families at home.
Yeah, I think what's one of the stories, we have a soccer athlete. He's a talented soccer athlete, and he is pursuing the Lord with his whole heart and comes from an unbelieving household. And when we were thinking about a couple students to share like 5-minute testimony, he was one that came to our one of our coaches' mind from our soccer program, and his ability to articulate his faith and the reason why he chooses Jesus every day. And so much of that is the leadership and guidance that he is getting really in our soccer program. But to be able to have him stand up on that stage in front of 300 of his peers, as well as family members, his parents were there. And it was probably the most moving part of the story to me, that his family was there listening to their son proclaim his faith really on his own journey. And it was just a really beautiful, not only witness, but I hope it was super encouraging to their hearts as they got to see the kid that they love and the kid that they adore owning who he was in Christ. And that was probably one of my favorite stories of the night. I'm not sure if that's the one you're thinking of.
Yeah, absolutely it was. Yeah. And when we now have a framework to operate from, I think back to our incoming athlete night that we had back in April or May, and I got a chance to present to all of the incoming freshman families, hey, this is the framework in this crazy world we call sports, with all of the weird influences we have in youth sports and club sports and all the NIL, and you can talk about all the chaos of that, but we have a framework to operate from. And this is what we utilize as we engage in sport in this community.
Some good questions coming in, and these are hitting at exactly the themes I was hoping to address. So we're aligned, audience, as we're thinking through this. So from James, he asks, do you do this consistently across all your athletic programs? And if so, what are the ways that you get your coaches to grasp and own these ideas? I think you hinted at this a little bit, of the challenge of getting the buy-in from everybody. So maybe expand on that. And how do you move from just one team, one coach doing it, to trying to implement this across an entire program?
Yeah, Coach Jess, how are we trying to do that across every sport program?
That's a great question. It's definitely taken a lot of time, and I think it's just the investment and continuing to kind of encourage the little victories along the way, whether it's one of our coaches choosing one of the things to focus on, whether it's just doing the hand prayer cards and celebrating, okay, that's a great entry point. That's a great start. Now, how can we take it a step further? Or coming alongside a coach and saying, okay, what are some of the barriers that your team is coming up against this year? Every coach really has a desire to want to make sure that they put their teams in the best positions possible. And barriers are things coming up. So that's a really great way to connect and challenge not only like that language of, okay, well, this might be a physical barrier. What is the spiritual barrier that could come alongside that as well? And then that we can start to engage in, okay, what are some of the restoratives that we can offer? And so I think it's being present and having the opportunity to meet with those coaches. I really know and understand that my position doesn't happen everywhere. And so it's really an incredible opportunity that I have to just go meet with our coaches and be available to them for that. But I think additionally, it's continuing to just pour resources and encouragement. So I send out a Sport as Worship celebration email every Friday, and that gives little notes of encouragement, maybe a coach that did a lab this week that was really successful. And we shout that out and we say, oh, this is how it was done. And we're kind of making sure that we're talking about these things and the things that are happening within our community.
So from an administrative point of view, so now that I sit in the seat of director of athletics, part of it is, how am I supporting Jess? How am I connecting our coaches to Jess, and just continuing to speak the same language? So since Jess and I teach the class together, that ends up being a really helpful, obvious, like, Coach Wahl is as invested in this as Coach Jess is, and he is in support of this. That's a really important thing, that as a leader, that we've got to make sure we're supporting both the people in positions, whether it's a chaplain or whether it is an assistant AD who oversees spiritual formation, that there's support there and there's support of the coach, but it's support along with challenge that becomes probably the secret sauce of the whole thing. And again, hey, we're not perfect. We don't have every single coach totally dialed in, telling the absolutely deep spiritual story like Coach Jess's team did, but everybody's in progress and everybody is really starting to figure it out in their own way and in their own timing.
And I'd imagine they're adding things that you implement for everybody, right? They're probably coming up with ideas you didn't think of. And it's like, hey, that's great. Let's, here's another example of what this could look like.
And when you have the class and the student leaders are starting to impact the adults, that's when the thinking and and that's been the great blessing of having the class in place.
Another question, just to keep on this theme, this is from Zach. He's just asking, some clarification here, but thinking about the structure of what it looks like at Valor Christian. He asks, is it the head coach, assistants, chaplains, or all of the above that lead the teams in the labs and daily practices? So whose job is it to implement those labs?
How would you answer that, Jess?
I think as we think about whose job it is, we obviously want it to be driven by the head coach, because we believe that if that becomes a priority and that's how they're speaking, the athletes will catch that message. Like, this is important to me. This is in my practice plan. And so we hope that the coaches are drivers of that, but we have, whether it's assistant coaches or student chaplains or even our chaplains, we have a phenomenal chaplain in our hockey program, and he does a great job of this and just assisting our head coach. Maybe our head coaches are not like, oh, this is something new to me, I don't really quite understand. And so we want to make sure that there are people in place to be able to help assist them in that. We have started a student chaplaincy program here with, we have it's called Valor Discovery. We take kind of mission trips. So they have students that have come back from their trips really impacted, who want to serve as chaplains. We're partnering with that program and creating a student chaplain discipleship program, actually. And we're meeting with these students and athletes at least once a month and giving them more tools to be able to help kind of deliver these things also in practices as well.
And some of my favorite labs have actually come from Coach Jess's assistants. And so it's been just a great gift to watch these people that Coach Jess has coached come back and then implement their own labs in the same way. For me, one of my former players and former assistant coaches is baseball coach now, and I love watching the things that he creates as a result. So they're just over time. It's just long obedience in the same direction. How do we continue to use all this language over and over again until it finally sticks in the hearts of people?
Another question about process. This one is from Seth, and process and institution. And this is a good one here, because of course you have the coaches who have been there, who maybe were there before you even started this sport as worship thing. But we also know in athletics, there's turnover. People are moving on, they're getting other roles. So what are your processes for onboarding new coaches and assistant coaches? How do you bring them into this journey of, being fully on board with sport as worship?
Yeah, one of the things that organizationally that I've really tried to implement this year is putting all of the resources in one spot. We call it a dashboard. It's just a Google Doc with a ton of different links, and that allows them to access anything and everything that they need. And one of the things that they have to do is a preseason checklist, and one of those checklist items is meeting with Coach Jess and going through where your resources are and making sure that all of those pieces are in place. And we do that a good couple months before the season. It's not a week before, it's a couple months before, so that you can really think deeply about where your team is going. But Coach, let's talk more about some of that preseason meeting that you've just been going through them with the winter coaches right now.
Yeah. So typically it's with the head coach, but the assistant coaches, I've done some with them as well. It's kind of just up to the head coach and how they feel they want to start, and then we kind of move along from there. And so we'll walk through kind of what are our expectations, what do we hope to experience, but ultimately we encourage them to kind of write out a spiritual development plan. Like, what does this look like for you? What are the things that you hope for to experience this year? Spiritually, so outside of sports, so spiritually. And then what are those barriers that you might experience? What are some of the labs maybe that you have tried? If they're a new coach, this is where I get to teach them. What is a lab? Here are some examples. And then get to show them some examples for that. We also get to walk through all of our resources. All our resources are housed in some folders for all of our coaches, and our coaches get to share that with their assistant coaches. And it's kind of a one-stop shop for them to be able to say, oh man, this week we're really diving into identity as a restorative. What are some things, what are some lab ideas, what are some small group questions maybe that we can grab and use as a jumping off point as we pray through what that looks like for our coaches.
Excellent questions. Keep rolling in. Continue a couple more process program related. We've had two similar questions, so we'll combine these here together. So one of these from Isaac, he asks, how do you help student athletes in the off season or summer when they're not with the school? And then building on that from another guest, what is the plan for them to continue after they graduate? So thinking of your alums, is there anything there where they're kind of incorporated into this process? And then off season, summer, how does that work for Valor?
Yeah, I think Jess, I think you should speak to some of the principles that you've implemented with some of the alums who just stay in touch with you, and ultimately it boils down to the common language. And once we have that common framework, that's where you really get to dive in. So speak to that a little bit, Jess.
I had a student athlete that was a freshman in last year playing college basketball at the Division I level, and just as most freshmen do, especially mid-year, kind of like early January rolls around and just really struggling. She's somebody that I had connected with often when she was here, but we really started to reconnect again kind of when things were a little bit hard, and kind of to think about ways to help her as she kind of approached the game. I asked her to send me her IMGC before every game. And so that became a practice for her to sit down, to pray about, and to write about. What does that look like for me as I approach this game? And it was so amazing for me to watch her from the first ones to kind of towards the end of the season, and for her to repeat that practice. And that's not just a one-off. This summer, we actually had current student athletes when they're competing in club sports do IMGCs. I've been walking alongside a collegiate athlete who played lacrosse here, who's at North Carolina, and she's an exceptional lacrosse player. She's the #1 recruit in the country, and started doing that specific practice with her starting in April, and she's doing that now with me. And so those are some of the touch points we have. I can't replicate myself enough, I think, to do that for everybody. But it is one of those ways that has been a really sweet and easy, but also impactful connection point because they remember the language.
So what you heard Coach Jess do there was she dove into the spiritual disciplines component and encouraged the athletes to dive into that. And one of the things, as I start to talk to athletes, or even honestly, even parents at this point, I start to listen for what barrier are they having a hard time overcoming, and how can I help them get through that barrier through a conversation or through their own practices. Right. I think Coach Jess said it perfectly, that we don't know how to replicate ourselves times, however many kids we have in sports here, about 900 kids who play sports at Valor Christian High School. Not sure how to do that for every kid just yet. Not sure how to maintain our relationship through the summertime and through all our crazy club seasons and all the different things that are going on. But it's certainly something that we'll continue to give more thought to. But I think the root is finding that common language.
A question here, shifting a little bit to maybe some challenges question, and then the last batch I want to get to are some extensions, applications, like where else might this work type of question, but challenges questions. We have a couple of these. One is, so we talked about maybe coaches just being hesitant at first and building trust there. What about players? Have you had examples of players who are just like, I don't want to do this? Have there been challenges there? And when you face that resistance from players, how do you navigate and walk with it? And maybe it's a player they don't share the same faith commitments and it doesn't feel authentic to them, right? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, love one of the things I love is speaking life into Coach Jess, and one of her superpowers is the way she approaches things is with an absence of judgment. And so when people ultimately, whether they want to try this, whether it's a kid or an adult, it's fear of failure, fear of judgment. And when you approach them with judgment being absent, boy, does it invite them in this really powerful way. And so, yeah, we haven't had this perfect group of little Christian kids walk into our classroom saying, yay, let's all do the same thing. We've got these unique challenges, but when you don't overcorrect, when you don't heap judgment on them, and all of a sudden they just feel this difference from you, it's pretty cool. So I've learned a lot just working with Coach Jess in the classroom and observing her as a coach. But I think the less judgment you bring to the table, the more likely they are to come your way. I don't know if you agree, Jess, or have other thoughts, but that was my reaction.
I think that's why the lab concept is so powerful, and because it's taken out of the classroom setting, or even just in a seated devotional time in a locker room space, where they could sit and be like, well, I just choose not to listen. I don't want to be here. And goodness, we have 14 to 18, and they're feeling all sorts of things throughout the course of a moment or a day. And so the lab component is so practical, because it might be a drill that I do every single day, or something that we come back to often because it's a practical thing that we're doing. And then now we're adding something just a little bit different to kind of make them pause. That's the whole goal, is to just, can I get them to a place where they might just pause for a moment and be like, and then whether they take that and that works in their heart, it's not up to me anymore, but I need to present opportunities for them to pause and see it in a different light.
That's really good. Thanks for that. Okay, next question on challenges. When your team is struggling, this is from Jackie, how do you keep the joy? And then Brian had a similar question. Thinking about difficult situations, how to resolve and handle those in a positive spiritual way. So, right. So we saw, some of the examples you gave. It was in the midst of competition, you use gratitude and write victory results, but how do you, when you have a team on a losing streak, when things are going bad, how do you cultivate joy in those moments?
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you can't have gratitude and anxiety at the same time. And when you're going through those hard times, it does peak that anxiety. So how can you, on the other side of this, say, what are you grateful for and what's the opportunity? No matter how bad it is, and by the way, I played baseball. I've been through my fair share of an 0 for 25, going to the plate, can't figure it out. But man, you know what I wish I had at the time when I was in college going through those kinds of things? I sure wish I had a gratitude minute. I sure wish I had that opportunity to express gratitude. And what is the opportunity that is still before me? I think that it's all about that gratitude and that opportunity that you have the opportunity to reframe it. Jess, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We even talked before when we were preparing for the presentation of in that moment, I'm so glad that we won. And I'm really pleased that I feel like watching my team win the state championship, my heart was so full of joy and just in awe of them. And somebody asked me, would I feel the same way had we lost? And I absolutely would honestly say, not just saying this, I would, because the way in which I experienced my own coaching transformation, and the way that God really worked through the things that we were experiencing throughout the course of the season. We lost a string of games. We lost some close ones. We had some injuries. There are things there, obviously, that were outside of our control. But I think just the steadiness in which that group was attentive enough to lean into, okay, what is God teaching us? Our big question at the end is can we just put ourselves in a position to see what God can do? And if that is really what our heart's intention is, then we're making room for God to show up.
Okay, as we wrap up here, we're keeping you a couple minutes long. So okay?
That's all right.
All right.
All good.
We're wrapping up here with our last few questions, and I'm sure for those of you, if you have some questions and we weren't able to get to them, Keith and Jess, I'm sure happy to connect with you and talk more.
Mhm.
So we've seen this work, Valor Christian High School. You're able to build this within an athletic department. There seems to be buy-in from the school. You're teaching a class, right? You have all these
Mhm.
pieces in place that have been a struggle to get to, but you've been able to put them in place and really build something unique and special. Steve asks, are there ways you could see elements of your program working in non-Christian schools? And then along with that, another question, could you see this working in a shorter term setting, like a week-long or weekend sports camp? So could you see this, in other words, being something that is introduced to people who might not be Valor Christian and they do it for a week and try it out? Or could you see this working in non-Christian spaces?
Yeah, we've had that conversation around, gosh, how would we encourage our brothers and sisters who are in the public school system? How could we help them introduce these ideas? I do think so. You obviously have to be a lot more careful. Like I think one of the conversations we've had has been around that idea of with. And so you might not, to a non-believing group or into a public school group, you might not talk about the restorative of with as doing things with God, but you might talk about doing it with one another and the value of team over self. So there are restorative elements that, yeah, man, you can throw the theology and the Bible verses behind them, but you can also just say a wise person once said. You can also do some of those kinds of things. And everybody knows that sports is broken. Yeah, I mean, that's not even hard. Everybody agrees to that. So how might we restore that? And in that, we are partnering with the Creator in restoring His creation. So I think yes to address that part. Coach S, I don't know if you want to address that or the other part too.
I think the short-term element is definitely a possibility as well. We actually do this in our week-long camps. We host a ton of sports camps here on campus, and a lot of our coaches do lots of different things, but we're actually seeing a lot of our coaches use the elements of sport as worship as a part of their time with their campers. So campers love a break. Everybody loves popsicle. We do popsicle hour, or not hour, popsicle like 20 minutes. They would love an hour, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, they would.
But the popsicle break becomes kind of a devotional time, and that's where we really introduce some of those concepts. And then we get to take that and we write emails back home about what they did at camp during the day, and then we offer that back. So for me, we've had 4 or 5 day camps, and we go through our IMGCs. So we do those daily practices as a baseline foundation. So it just kind of becomes a part of it. We've had kids now that have come through our camp program into our high school. And so now it's more than just familiar. It's something that they know and something that they're comfortable with. And it's something that this can get into a rhythm. And I know the language, and I can step in with confidence, understanding kind of what it is that they're asking in this kind of daily practice type of thing. So I think it's absolutely possible. I think there's a lot of different ways that you could do it by focusing on one restorative and one barrier throughout the course of a week. I think that you can do maybe 3 restoratives, 2 barriers, or the IMGC component. So I think there's a lot of way to do that.
Okay, last question here. Are you able to share the framework and resources you use to implement your sport as worship concept? This is from anonymous attendee, so we don't know who said it, but someone is curious about seeing more of these resources you've developed.
Yeah, we probably aren't in that spot just yet to be in the shareable space. But you never know what the future holds. At the end of the day, we want to, probably for my heart for this in particular, is point people to Baylor. And we are happy to help guide, encourage, maybe a creation of your own thing wherever you are. And we have some relationships with some schools around the country, and we hope to come to the Global Congress at Baylor this summer and talk more about sport as worship there. But yeah, it's just a matter right now of how in the world would you share all that we shared, or all that even all that we have in our back pocket? How in the world would we share that? And I don't know if we really have answers to that. And Coach S, I hope that's a fair answer. It's one we talk about often, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Someday this would be great to have this packaged, I think, in a way that's helpful and accessible. And something, you both said early on, I think was really important, was this is what works in your context. This is where, out of your convictions, your skills, God has designed you to be, the gifts that you have, the place that you're at, you've pulled together, you've created something really unique. But there's other ways of faith sport integration. And so if you're at a different school, a different location, you can start to do this. You can try it out and develop some new, some new practices and try some things. But I would say other spaces do this, but it is really unique what Keith and Jessika you've developed. I think this is a catalyst for a conversation I hear often from Christian school leaders. It's how do we do this well? How do we build a whole culture across the school to integrate faith in sports? And while you're not the only ones doing it, I think this is one of my favorites, and I'm so glad for others to hear from it. And I do let's figure out a way to get this shared with others. We're happy to help with that down the road.
Well, Paul, thanks so much for your encouragement. And if any of you have not yet had a chance to take a course, a certificate course or others from Dr. Putz, you need to. He is a tremendous instructor and such a great encouragement. So thanks so much for having us, Paul. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you, audience, for your time, for your questions, some fantastic questions. I know we didn't get quite to all of them, but again, if you want to shoot an email afterwards, please do reach out to me and I'll connect you with Keith and Jess. Also, I did post in the chat box a link to the Global Congress on Sport and Christianity. I think when you close this, your Zoom browser, you'll actually be redirected automatically to the Global Congress page. So just a heads up. This is another chance to learn from Keith and Jess and many others. So this is going to be a gathering next summer where thought leaders, scholars, and practitioners, and just Christians trying to make sense of how do we engage in sports. We're going to be gathering at Baylor, and we're going to be sharing ideas, sharing resources, presenting some of the work that we do. And Keith and Jess are going to be sharing more about what they do at Valor Christian, and others will be getting to share different elements of how they approach sports and Christianity. So I'd encourage you to check out that link, go to that page. And if you have a proposal you'd like to submit, please do. If you have more questions, please reach out. And of course, we encourage more conversations for anyone interested in these topics. So thanks again. Thank you, Keith and Jess. Enjoy your evening. And we're excited to continue to follow the work that you do.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.